reducing suffering. Like you feel this way and you're suffering and you try to do things to reduce your suffering. And what about people who they think that, and it works short term for some people, like I'm suffering, so I'm going to make other people suffer. And that's going to reduce my suffering.
Yeah.
Like you're not using your rationality there. And maybe they don't have or I guess it depends on how you define it, but in how, they don't have the means to think about things in such a grand way and think like, well, but making this person suffer is affecting my relationship with them, and then it's going to affect this relationship, and then 10 years from now, whatever it is. Like in those cases, how would you talk to them about it, or how, like, it's a big problem. I mean, that's definitely a big problem is if you're only basing it on, well, reduce my suffering, that's where living an extremely like expedient life where you're just doing things that reduce your suffering right now and the immediate comes into play. And then if and we've talked a little about, I'm not Christian, but I love delving into Christianity, but that's where religion can help people like that. You bring in religion, you bring in this big grand story with all these people that have done it, this big community, and it makes them realize, oh, well, this isn't, actually doing this isn't good. And however, there's a lot of not great things with that. But anyway, I'm just like, it's a very interesting subject.
My reaction to that is,
it's very broad.
But I'm wanting to speak carefully so that I say what I mean.
Gotcha.
I agree with, I think the Buddha probably said it maybe first, or since the Buddha's time for thousands of years, that the way to reduce suffering is to see the world as it is. So you suffer when there's there are phrases in Buddhism that get translated well or not well to English, like greed, hatred, and delusion, or attachment, aversion, and ignorance, would basically be the recipe for suffering. So if you think the world is other than it is, including you and your internal workings, then you will suffer in some way. You'll be attached to something that is going to let you down, or you will rely on something that's not reliable, or you will think that something brings you joy that does not. All sorts of ways, right? And I haven't heard that falsified. I haven't heard an argument against that, I guess.
No, I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. And that's why I think meditation and things like that are really important. And people, I think that's why I like having these conversations, try to just talk about this stuff, because I agree with you. I think that's one of the biggest problems with a lot of people's anxiety and being depressed is they have expectations. They have these big expectations, which isn't reality. You set these big expectations in your mind, and you think of yourself as some way, but it isn't actually meeting the reality that you're living, and you're just constantly being let down. So I agree with that 100%. I really like the Buddha philosophy for sure. Like even the whole notion that evil is just lack of knowledge or something. Isn't that something like that? I think it's something like that.
It's just, I guess the interpretation would be that evil is just a mistake. It's just someone who is completely mistaken about the good life.
And I'm curious because I don't want to put words in Sam Harris's mouth. I don't want to. I'm not yet knowledgeable enough on his ideas, but I'm curious, like, if you don't mind helping me understand a little bit what Sam Harris is kind of like. What is he trying to do with his content that he creates? Because just very quickly, to me, it seems like he's kind of trying to say you don't need religion. And I know that I know he said this, like, I don't want to quote and say this is exactly what he said, but I know he said like religion, he thinks religion is like a net negative. I think in one of the Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris debates, he actually said like he thinks religion is a like overall negative thing. And Chris and I got into the discussion of, I know and maybe it's just a complete misunderstanding of what I see rationalism as, but we talked a little about how you can use your rationality to justify doing horrible things, and maybe that's like a
I don't know how
semantic
that's
thing.
possible.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's just that I'm defining rationality wrong, but like, and I don't know what the word would be to describe it, but people can use, I mean, okay, before I keep going, what is rationality exactly? Like, what, just generally? I know
Good
you can't
question.
like define it exactly,
Yeah.
but
What I'm understanding,
yeah,
reason, rationality, logic, this might be one of those cases where three words kind of mean the same thing.
yeah.
But I don't think rationality in and of itself gives you any conclusion.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know what, it'd be like a computer with no software, with no input.
Okay.
Like if I said, what is a calculator really trying to tell me?
Gotcha.
Right? That question doesn't really make sense.
Gotcha. So it's
There's
like
no
more
goal.
of a tool, you think? Like
Yeah.
rationality is a
Yeah.
tool.
That's the way I understand it, is that if you're using facts to get to an end goal or to try to figure out what might be real, then you use rationality. And
No, that makes makes a lot of sense. Which you could argue. I think that's the argument. The reason Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris have such this heated debate is because Jordan Peterson says it's not enough. Rationality isn't enough for some people, and so this is why I don't want to say that this is what Sam Harris says. But it seems like Sam Harris says rationality should be enough, though, to get you to live like a more meaningful life where you can try to approach that ultimate well-being. But if it's just a tool and there's no, like, if it's just a tool and you can't really achieve an outcome from it, then how can you just use rationality rather than having some like underlying value structure, I guess, would be the question,
Yeah. I have a couple reactions to this.
Yeah.
One is just a semantic one, which is there's a great clip of Steven Pinker on YouTube and from I think years ago where it's just Steven Pinker on reason, and he says if somebody comes to you and is trying to convince you of something, or once you and I have engaged in a dialogue where we're trying to see eye to eye or trying to persuade one another of something, we have to give reasons for that. So it's not. So there are ways of not using reason, like if I put a gun to your head and I say, just tell me that you agree with me, right? I don't want a reason. I just want the outcome.
Gotcha.
If I, and there are cliches along those lines. If I said, might is right, whoever happens to be in charge should be in charge. Most people know that's flawed. That's off. And most, I mean, I say most people, I don't know, but if you talk to somebody and you ask them, do you think that's true? My guess is they'll give you a reason that they think that is either true or false. And if you think that there's a better and a worse way of doing something, or that there's that somebody's mistaken about something, that whatever that process is, I don't care what we call it, but whatever that process is, that's what I understand reasoning to be.
Okay.
So if I'm being rational, I'm just accounting for the data that we have, or the information at hand. So I don't know. I don't think it's possible to say somebody is using rationality and that's a bad thing. They might be reasoning poorly.
I see what you're saying.
Right?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, that you can't put the blame on like rationality.
Rationality, exactly.
What I was saying, sorry to interrupt, but what I was saying is like people who commit like crimes, people who commit atrocious crimes, like school shooters and stuff, they in their minds, and not every case or anything, but you can read about some of the things that these people think about and say, and it's they're justifying why they're doing it, and there are people that even make intelligent cases as to why it is better for them to do like atrocious things, and then that's why I was saying, well, isn't that using your rationality? But it like you said, it makes a lot of sense to just think of it as, it's not like you can't put the blame on it. It's just a tool. It's just like a tool.
Well, can I give you an example that always strikes me? The behavioral economics field also blows my mind every time I read a new book or discover a new researcher in that field. So what game theory and altruism taught me also, especially from an evolutionary standpoint, people would say, especially 100 years ago or more, would say, well, it's rational to just bulldoze everyone around you and get what you want, in this selfish way. It's strictly rational from the individual standpoint. If you and I were in line for something, for me to just cut you in line and then threaten to fight you if you wanted to go toe to toe about it, and then I win because I get my stuff early. But later, now we have these new ways of looking at that, and if I'm really being rational, I wouldn't cut you in line because I wouldn't be accounting for all the data. So data point one is, if I cut you in line, I get my food sooner. And that's a benefit, and I want that outcome, so I do it, right? That seems rational. But data point two is, if I cut you in line now and get my food sooner, you will not trust me or like me or share with me if I'm down on my luck. So data point three is, rule, don't cut people in line even though you want your food as soon as possible. Yeah. So first come, first serve kind of thing. So if I'm being rational, and I'm quote unquote rational, and I'm getting something, and I'm arriving at a conclusion that is still unsavory, my suspicion is that I'm not accounting for enough data, that there's something else there that I'm not seeing.
So let me ask, that's a really good way to put it too. It's like rationality is the you could say ability or whatever. It's like it's this ability to open up to broaden your horizons of the options. Like you're trying to broaden and see the full landscape,
or maybe even to organize them, or a little more active. And again, I'm not in philosophy. There are a couple different types of rationality, but again, being reasonable to me is being more in touch with subjective experiences. Yeah. I think there's also a Spock-like interpretation where Spock is, supposedly the most logical person that isn't, or mostly is immune to quote unquote emotional states or impulsive, sentimental types of attachments, right?
Yeah.
But that is a shortcoming, because then when the situation calls for attention to your subjective state, that's another piece of information that you're missing, right?
Yeah.
So yes, we need to do this, that, and the other thing, but we also need it to feel good. So it doesn't, to me, I don't know.
Makes sense.
It's too simple for me to say, not because I demand that it be more complicated. I mean, Antonio Damasio also says, we are feeling machines that think, not thinking machines that feel. So there's no rational inner person where I'm really this rational soul who gets bogged down by my emotions, or I get set back by my disappointments.
I gotta look this guy. I gotta read more.
He's great. He's great.
That sounds awesome.
And he just inspires to me a bigger conversation.
Yeah.
And
I did want to ask you though, I'm curious. Just it's still on the subject.
Yeah. And I'm sorry, I didn't talk enough about Sam Harris, but
it's fine. I definitely want to get into Sam Harris for sure. But I love just the branching off to whatever topic. But the whole even using rationality. So I like what you're saying, and it makes perfect sense. Like it's organizing data. It's like you're rather than having a very narrow, maybe more selfish perspective, like you said, just cut someone off. That's the most rational thing. It benefits me right now. It's like broadening all the options or the data that's coming in. But then even the example that you said, it has this overarching goodness attached to it. It seems like it still has this overarching ultimate well-being attached to it. And I think that's where a lot of the friction comes in with Jordan Peterson, Sam Harris, those two crowds is Jordan Peterson would say, see, even using rationality and talking about that, there's this religious element to it, which is this overarching well-being. And people who go commit atrocious crimes or do school shootings, those people probably in their minds, the overarching good is what this thing that they want to go do. In their mind, they're justifying it. Like the Columbine shootings, you can read their journals. It's crazy stuff, but they're doing justice doing it. And it's just, to me, that's where it starts to get muddy, is that overarching well-being.